Clarence is my name, and music is my game. But it's not always easy when the others play it prettier than you. Yes, they do. I always try so hard, but it just never comes. I squeak and honk, I blow and bark, I squeal and screech and mess up till I'm done. It's no fun. They call me Squeaky, 'cause to them it's a game. They know it hurts me, but I guess it's the name I deserve. I deserve.
Clarence the Clarinet was sitting all by himself in his lonely little corner of the large instrument storage room. The lights were dim, and only shadows could be seen. It was late at night, and all the other instruments were quiet and asleep. They were all resting up for rehearsal the next day. Clarence was the only one still awake. He looked around him at all the other beautiful instruments. Although there were instruments of every shape, size, and color, the only ones that Clarence could see were those of the chamber orchestra. There were about 25 of them in all. There had been a rumor going around the past few days that a special piece of music was going to be performed very soon. Clarence realized that this particular collection of instruments in the small chamber orchestra just proved that the rumor was probably true. But alas, no one knew for sure just what the music was. No matter, really. Clarence already felt like he wouldn't be included. Clarence was never very confident in himself. Even though Clarence wasn't all that pleased with himself, he certainly admired the beautiful silver color of Flora's flute. Whenever Flora sang her florid song, her notes would flow so pure and clear, and she could soar so high. Clarence wished so much that his notes could be beautiful too. Sitting on the other side of Flora was Barry Bassoon, resting so snug and comfy in his big black case with a lovely chrome trim. When Barry spoke, his rich low voice caught everyone's attention. Well, except Flora Flute, who just loved to flirt. Clarence often wanted to roar down low, too. Instead, though, he just barked when he went too low. And when he tried to go too high, he just, well, you know, squeaked. Clarence could hear the strings on Vienna violin and her siblings gently vibrating as they quietly snored while they slept. She seemed so comfortable and secure, lying side by side with her large family. In this particular orchestra, Vienna's sisters, Violetta, Venetia, and Victoria, and her brothers Victor, Voce, Vander, and Viker were all going to play with her. Although all of them were important, Vienna was the first violin, and that made her special. Verna Viola, Vienna's cousin, and Verna's sister, Vignetta, and her two brothers, Willy and Vali, were there to support Vienna's family of violins. Chelsea Cello and her brother-in-law Chuckles were providing most of the bass sounds, while Donald Double Bass was there to make it go really low. Helga Harp was like a family all by herself. Oh, what a range! She could go low, 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 all the way to high, high, high. Pearly piano was the only other instrument that could match her range. And although Helga wasn't as loud as Pearlie, she was unmistakable and unmatched in her beauty. Clarence dreamed about how nice it would be to be almost any instrument in the orchestra. Any instrument but a squeaky old clarinet, that is. You see, Clarence was ashamed of how he sounded. No matter how hard he tried, he always seemed to bark and squawk whenever he blew. He just didn't feel very important in an orchestra where everybody seemed to sound so much better than he did. The other instruments would sometimes snicker a little during practice. They didn't think Clarence heard them, but he certainly did. Sometimes the other instruments in the orchestra could be kind of cruel, without really meaning to be. Not really meaning to be unkind, they nicknamed him Squeaky. No matter, he sighed with a big yawn. It's time to sleep now. I'm going to really rest up tonight, he thought, so I can be ready to give it my best tomorrow. One thing about Squeaky is that he never stopped trying. Sunbeams glowed through the window in the practice room early the next morning and warmly fell right on Squeaky's rich, dark ebony wood. He sighed a soft, warm-sounding middle C note. And it woke him with a start. Had he heard right? Or was it a dream? He quickly looked around, but no one else seemed to be paying any attention. He was sure he had heard a beautiful warm note coming right straight from his cone. He tried right away to duplicate it. This time I'll try a D note, he said quietly to himself. He focused himself, trying hard to keep straight. Then he blew really hard. Honk! Squeak! Squawk! Suddenly Squeaky heard everybody in the room laughing at him. Pearlie Piano was pushing on her black and white keys together, mocking him in an awful sound. He shrunk down low, feeling very embarrassed. But he decided that he didn't care what the others thought. He had heard a beautiful note coming straight from inside of him, and he just knew he could do it again. Suddenly, Tyrone Timpani boomed out a low B-flat note, using his hardest mallets to strike his regal white drumhead. That woke everyone up. The next thing everyone knew was that they were all in the orchestra rehearsal room sitting on their chairs. Squeaky was deep in thought now. A clicking sound interrupted Squeaky's thoughts. He looked up, and it was Charles, the conductor's baton, tapping on Mary's music stand. "Listen up," Charles said with authority. "Today we begin rehearsal for a new piece of orchestra music," he said with anticipation. The rehearsal room was abuzz with curiosity. "What new piece could it be?" asked Terence Trumpet. Frida French Horn replied, "I don't know for sure, but I bet it will feature me and my beautiful tones. Maybe it will even be a concerto," she added. The room went wild with excitement. A concerto! Wow! That meant one of the orchestral instruments would gain the deepest respect. The big question was, which one? Timothy Trombone blared loudly. "Bet it will be me." Pearlie Piano interjected and said, "No, you can be sure it will be me. The greatest concertos are always written for the piano." And everyone knew she could be right. The first thing Squeaky heard when he woke up in the morning was the excited talk that a great concerto would be played during rehearsal today. It was the dream of everyone to be the spotlight in a concerto. Each instrument, in turn, expressed their desire to be the instrument that the concerto was based upon. Everyone except for Squeaky, that is. Squeaky didn't even dare dream of such a moment. It was Charles, the conductor's baton again. I hate to interrupt all the speculation, but I think it's time to get to work. Just then, Sheila's sheet music cart began her rounds in front of each chair and its instrument. As usual, she started at the back of the orchestra and worked her way forward. "Here you go," she said to Tyrone Timpani. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," he replied with a repeating, resounding boom. He loved to show off his tone by singing back and forth in perfect fifths. Sheila then gave a stack of musical parts to Donald double bass. He croaked out a deep, "Thank you, Sheila. I'll pass these out to the rest of the strings." On and on went Sheila the sheet music cart, past Stanley snare drum, Zelda xylophone, and Peter Piatti she rolled. Their music was all marked mezzo piano, which meant they couldn't play as loudly as they liked to. Peter usually loved to crash his powerful cymbal hands together, but in this case he thought, I can still make some nice cymbal crescendos, even if I can't crash. Then on to Pearly Piano, who looked a little concerned when she didn't get the big stack of music she had expected. Sheila came next to Terence Trumpet and Timothy Trombone. Their music was marked even quieter than Zelda xylophone and Peter Piatti. This did not make either Terence or Timothy very happy because they just loved to blare out really loudly. In fact, Terence Trumpet saw on his music that he was supposed to insert a mute into his bell, and that would make him even quieter than usual. No matter. He loved to play, even if he had to be quiet. Finally, Sheila came to the woodwinds. First, a copy of music went to Flora Flute and Olga Oboe. Finally, she gave one to Barry Bassoon as he let out a rich burp, saying, "I appreciate that, Sheila." As she approached Squeaky, he held his breath, hoping so much that he would get a good little part. But Sheila just wheeled right on past him, never giving him so much as a second glance. Squeaky was heartbroken. Everybody in the orchestra was chuckling, thinking to themselves that Squeaky didn't really need a part anyway, since he would only make them sound bad. Squeaky could feel the tears beginning to roll down his keys. Even though Squeaky was made of wood, he hated to cry, because he was always afraid he would rust. At least maybe his keys would. But when Squeaky looked up, he saw Charles, the conductor's baton, coming right, straight toward him. Squeaky was very scared. He was afraid he would be asked to leave the orchestra. Charles strolled right up to Squeaky. But instead of asking him to leave, he handed Squeaky a stack of music thicker than any he had ever seen, much more than anyone else in the orchestra. He looked at the music, then he looked again. He couldn't believe his eyes. It was the concerto part. It was a clarinet concerto. "Wow!" he said so loudly that it gave a walloping bark from his reed. He was ready to jump for joy. "Thank you, thank you, thank..." His voice trailed off as he realized in horror that he could never pull this off. Never, never in a million years. Charles stepped closer and looked straight into Squeaky's eyes and said, "Squeaky, I talked to composer himself. He was the creator of this wonderful music, and he was very clear that he wanted you to play this part. He told me that he had great faith in you." "Squeaky," said Charles, "I have great faith in you too." In that moment, Squeaky decided that he could do it, that he would do it. He knew that the power of faith could conquer anything. The orchestra stood shocked. They couldn't believe what they had heard, but they had no choice but to accept it, because composer himself had chosen Squeaky. "That will be all for today," said Charles, the conductor's baton. "Everyone go practice your parts very carefully. We will begin rehearsal in just a few hours." Squeaky snuggled up in his quiet little corner of the storage room and began practicing the most important piece of music in his young life. He blew very quietly at first. With each little squeak, he could hear the other instruments around the room making little comments like, "Why should he get the great part?" or "He'll never be able to do it." Even Zelda's xylophone, who normally didn't say much, expressed her dismay by using her hard rubber mallets to play a discordant melody, which sounded very much like skeleton bones falling down in a pile. Well, Squeaky decided this time he'd show all of them that perfect practice could make perfect. But he knew he didn't have much time, so he needed to concentrate. He sat very quietly for a couple of moments. Deep within his own thoughts, he asked himself a very important question. How did I blow that beautiful C note this morning? He thought and he thought. All of a sudden it came to him. Relaxation. The word popped into his mind like a balloon popping in the air. He had blown that beautiful C note early this morning when he had been rested and relaxed. Squeaky had always tried so hard when he blew a note, and although he never thought it was possible, he realized now that he had always tried too hard. He steadied himself, he took a deep breath, but this time he relaxed and blew firmly, but gently, and with control. It worked. It worked. The note came out clear and clean. It was in the beautiful Chalumeau register, where clarinet notes are silvery and pure. He peeked into his most important music again. This time he began the scale in the first measure with firmness, but control. It's beautiful, he thought. It really is beautiful. Next came the arpeggio, playing the chord one note at a time. Beautiful again. Finally came the all-important theme of the concerto. This time it was Squeaky's theme, and he would make it great. Squeaky just couldn't believe himself. He had discovered the secret. It had been with him all the time. He had just been trying too hard to find it. Halfway down the first page, it became crystal clear to him. He really could play this great work. He would not let Charles, the conductor's baton, down. And even more importantly, he would not let composer down. At the end of the second page came a dazzling cadenza, where the music passage was very difficult. This would give Squeaky the opportunity to show what he could really do. He just relaxed in his mind. He now knew he could do this. Squeaky let himself go. How glorious he played, and played, and played, and played. Finally, he came to the end of the music, and played one last series of 16th notes, moving far up the scale and playing very fast, way up high into Squeaky's toughest register. He hit them all. When he stopped, he heard loud applause. He looked for the first time since he had started playing, and standing around him was every single instrument in the entire chamber orchestra. They were all cheering and clapping, some of them in tears at the beautiful way Squeaky had played. They were just as astonished as he was. Just then, Charles, the conductor's baton, came around the corner wearing a big grin. Just behind him stood composer himself. "You see, Squeaky," composer said in his rich, nurturing voice, "you just have to believe and have faith. You must always stay focused and keep trying until you achieve your goal. Bravo! I'll see you at the performance. Finally, the day of the big performance arrived. Squeaky had practiced very hard and felt like he was really prepared. It felt so good to be ready. Came the click of Charles, the conductor's baton. Charles took a quick glance over at Pearly Piano, smiled, and then turned his gaze toward Olga Oboe. Olga knew from long experience that this was her cue to play a tune-up note. It was the A note, because the whole orchestra could hear her very clearly. Pearly Piano always felt a little annoyed at this, thinking in her mind that I should be the one to provide the tune-up note. Charles, the conductor's baton, looked slowly and carefully around the orchestra to be certain that everyone was watching. When he was satisfied, he looked at Squeaky and winked with a smile. Up very slowly came Charles, the conductor's baton. Squeaky waited anxiously, but with patience. Charles slowly began his downbeat, directly pointing at Squeaky while indicating that everyone else should remain silent. Squeaky slowly began playing the first scale. He heard only the slightest squeak on the fourth note of the scale. It came right at the break in his register, where the notes were especially hard for him to play. He could hear a soft gasp from the orchestra, but Squeaky didn't panic. He stayed calm as he glanced up at Charles, who just nodded to him with a reassuring grin. Then came the arpeggio again, just like in rehearsal. He played firm and gently. It was absolutely beautiful. The notes were so clear and wonderful and high. Now he knew he was on his way. On he played and played and played. He played his wonderful theme, with many of the others joining in with a joyful noise. The orchestra flurried with rich harmonies, flowing melodies, and wonderful combinations of instrument sounds. It was the most glorious thing that Squeaky had ever heard. It was coming time for Squeaky to begin his final run toward the end of the concerto. The tempo of the music was increasing to a furious pace, building higher and higher, instrument on top of instrument. Then, with stunning silence, the orchestra came to an abrupt stop. Only Vienna and her violin family remained, with a soft but tense, shimmering tremolo. He had been concentrating so hard that it had taken Squeaky by surprise. He sat there only for the briefest of moments, but it seemed like an eternity. Squeaky calmed himself in his great little heart, knowing now that his faith would get him through, just like composer said it would. He began that final glorious cadenza that he had worked so hard on, sweeping upward, then downward, then upward higher again, then higher yet. Perfect! Squeaky played perfectly. He hit that last note with a powerful entrance from the orchestra. audience leapt to their feet in thunderous applause that went on for what seemed like hours. They love me, Squeaky thought, with a really warm feeling. Then he turned around to see the entire orchestra standing on their chairs, cheering and clapping with the deepest respect, including composer himself. And Squeaky, for the very first time, realized that they loved him too.
Squeaky is my name, and music is my game, and I am here to tell you that I know that you can do the things you want to. I am proof. Keep on trying hard, it pays off in the end, and you will see that sticking to it is the very best thing you can do. It is true.
They love me, Squeaky thought, with a really warm feeling. Then he turned around to see the entire orchestra standing on their chairs, cheering and clapping with the deepest respect, including composer himself. And Squeaky, for the very first time, realized that they loved him too.
Squeaky is my name, and music is my game, and I am here to tell you that I know that you can do the things you want to.